Welcome to Life Rebounding, where you'll find short devotions based on Christian reflections on the scriptures and life itself, with a view towards inspiring rebounds in life when we fall down, when we get stuck, when we need some hope. And so my prayer is that as you join me in these short devotions, that you may find hope for your rebounds in life. And today we're looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 10 once again. In particular, we're looking at verses 3 to 6, and I want to read for you from the Message today these words where Paul writes, "The world is unprincipled. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. The world doesn't fight fair. But we don't live or fight our battles that way. Never have and never will. The tools of our trade aren't for marketing or manipulation, but they are for demolishing that entire massively corrupt culture. We use our powerful God tools for smashing warped philosophies, tearing down barriers erected against the truth of God, fitting every loose thought and emotion and impulse into the structure of life shaped by Christ. Our tools are ready at hand for clearing the ground of every obstruction and building lives of obedience into maturity." I love the way the Message puts those words in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. I was watching recently the movie 12 Strong, which was about 12 U.S. soldiers who were dropped in behind enemy lines in Afghanistan after 9/11, who had a specific mission for 3 weeks to try and interrupt supply lines and get to a significant city held by Al-Qaeda. And it documents their sacrifices that they made, the costs that they paid, and also the success of their mission. Their particular mission was described as one of the greatest defeats of Al-Qaeda, in Al-Qaeda's own words. Well, the Apostle Paul sees life's struggles for believers as being a war as well, where we encounter opposition against the things of God and against gospel truth. And he reminds us that we're engaged in a war, but our war is not like the world's wars, and we don't use tools like the world uses. One of the things that we recognize as Paul highlights the struggles that we have today in this world is that we have been dropped behind enemy lines, where we are seeking to interrupt supply lines, to break the chains of the enemy's strongholds, and to set people free. And in doing so, we recognize that in our particular struggles, that two of the casualties, the most frequent casualties, are truth and freedom. Today, we find a real devaluing of mindful thought, of people who are willing to put their brains to work intellectually to determine what is true and what's not. And it's because we live in a world that finds it much easier to deal instead with sound bites and targeted rhetoric. And by that I mean you will hear people say things today in our culture, in media, that never has the intention of being expressed as truth, but simply to get put out there as a counter to what somebody else might be saying or doing, or indeed actually to just drive your own agenda. And undiscerning people pick up that rhetoric and they adopt it as though it's true, and then they form values on the basis of it. And that is a real casualty for people today in our culture. And so the reality is what we think frames the values that we live, the decisions that we make. It frames our identity. It frames how we think about our responsibilities and our privileges. And we tend to think more about privileges than responsibilities when we follow the world's logic and the world's way of thinking. And it also impacts, that problem thinking impacts our freedom. And what Paul challenges us to do here in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 to 6, is to be thoughtful people, to use our brains that God gave us and wants us to use. He wants us to use the tools that he's provided for us. And they're not the tools of manipulation or heated rhetoric. They're spiritual tools. And so our tools For this battle that we find ourselves engaged in are tools like the gospel of Jesus Christ that counters the world's philosophies and says there is only one way to heaven, one way to peace, and that is through the Prince of Peace, Jesus Christ. And that it is through Jesus Christ that people are set free. And so the gospel is one of those powerful tools that God gives us, as is the Word of God, the Bible. To have that influence in our lives helps shape our values and our thinking, and it becomes the standard by which we measure if something is true or not. We also have the tool of prayer. And by prayer, I mean simply our commitment to a relationship with God that is born in intimacy, where we want to be with Him and hear from Him as much as He wants to be with us and hear from us. And that's what prayer is. It's about keeping that relationship open and close. But we also have tools like grace and compassion that we use day by day in our lives and our relationships with other people. We have a tool called holiness, and lest you get bent out of shape about that word, think about holiness as simply being the ability to bear a Christ-like resemblance, to bear a family resemblance, the ability to say no to things that are hurtful to us, and the ability to say yes to the things that build us up and build up others. That's holiness, living for God. And how about justice as a tool that's in our tool belt these days? Being people who are committed to the issues of justice in our world, so that they are those who are facing inequities in life, who are facing injustice, have someone who's fighting for them. These are all just some of the tools that we have available to us. And the thing is, we have indeed been dropped behind enemy lines. And our task is to expose the manipulative rhetoric that takes place in our culture today, to refute the flawed and warped philosophies that point people away from God, to counter culture's lies, and there are lots of lies out there, to remove the obstacles of faith that are being presented day by day to people, to be people who are winsome and honest and reflective of the light of Jesus Christ that has dawned upon our own souls and the love that has transformed us. All this we can't do on our own. Paul reminds us that all this happens because of God's power that's at work within us, the same power that He used to raise Jesus from the dead. So my encouragement for you today is to remember that your mind matters, that God expects us to use our brains, to be thoughtful people, not only for ourselves, but for those who are around us and for the broader culture and world that we live in, so that we can expose the lies that keep people in prison and in darkness. Well, may you find your place in the battle today, and may your mind be one that God uses to bless the lives of people around you and bring them to life and to hope and to freedom and to a life that is rebounding with God's grace.